Hi, today's episode is about Proposition 140. For full disclosure, One Community is the parent corporation of Full Swing Studios. And Full Swing Studios is where we shoot Better Together Arizona, and Full Swing has produced videos in support of Proposition 140. We hope you enjoy the show.
My name is Gabe Hagan. I am the co-founder of Brick Road Coffee here in Tempe. I believe it's important to vote because our rights are on the line. Visit yourvoteisyourvoice.com to register to vote and learn more about the upcoming election.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to our latest and greatest episode of Better Together Arizona. I'm Angela Hughey, the co-founder and president of One Community and One Community Foundation. Super excited to have Kimber, Lanning, the CEO and founder of Local First Arizona, and Adam Goodman with us today, who's the CEO of Goodmans. How are you both?
Fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this conversation. So today we're going to talk about Prop 140, which I believe is also known as Make Elections Fair or Make Elections Fair Arizona. So to get us started about Prop 140, I was hoping that you could talk about like what inspires Prop 140.
Well, I'd say, first of all, the system we have now, the way the system we have now works, I'm a registered independent. Registered independent.
Yeah.
And so there's a primary, of course, in a general election. In the primary, there's a Republican primary and a Democratic primary. And we, the three of us, are excluded from voting in either one of those unless we take the proactive step to request one of those ballots. And that's not in the Constitution or anything. That's not how the Founding Fathers designed this. It's hardly far from it. Founding Fathers wanted more participation. And here we are, we have two private entities using taxpayer funds to create an election that we're excluded from.
Well, and you say taxpayer funds, and so one of the things that I do think it's important everyone knows is that all three of us pay taxes.
100%.
Right? Yeah. So, and you know, I did a little research on Dr. Google this morning before we got ready for this. Close to 35% of registered voters in the state of Arizona are independents, right? So more than a third of registered voters in Arizona are not able to participate in Arizona's primaries unless they take some extra steps. And I think what we've seen is most independents just don't actually realize that they can even take the extra steps, right? So there's a really low primary voter turnout anyway, and then an even lower percentage of independents who are voting in primary. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
We've spent a lot of time and effort educating independents that they can vote. They have to request the ballot. But it's an uphill climb because most independents think they can't vote because they're not sent a ballot.
But we can vote in state-based elections. But am I correct that for federal elections, like for the primaries for president of the United States, independents are not allowed to vote in those primaries?
Oh, we'll have to get back to
I
Dr.
think
Google.
I will talk to Dr. Google about this, but I feel pretty certain that as an independent, because we weren't registered as Republicans or Democrats, we don't even get a chance to vote in the presidential primary.
Sense. You know, come to think of it, I didn't cast a primary vote.
Nor did you get the postcard in the mail reminding you that you could.
Right.
There you go.
Right.
So,
and this is the fastest growing group also. It's
Yeah.
not just that it's 35% today. It is growing leaps and bounds more quickly than either of the other two parties.
You're talking about fastest growing. I went to Dr. Google again this morning because I felt that I had seen something recently about Gen Z. And ASU put out a report recently. 95% of Gen Z support open primaries. 49% of Generation Z are independent voters. So younger people, and to your point, Kimber, more and more people are trending to be independents. Mm-hmm. So talk about what an open primary actually is.
Open primary, well, one more point on the primaries. That you made the comment that very few people participate in the primaries. Typically, it's the furthest extremes in the parties, the true believers, if you will, are the ones who participate. And if you're going to run for office and you need to get through a primary, you're not going to waste your time talking to people who you don't think are going to vote in the primary. And so the candidates direct all their attention to those extremes, and those extremes bring them into the office, and that's why we end up with what we end up with. And so many so many offices are gerrymandered so that there really is no general election. It's
Right,
a
so
Republican district or a Democratic
It's
district.
something like close to 80% of the districts, I think, in Arizona are gerrymandered, meaning that
Yes.
they're a plus 7 or 8 or 10 or 20
The other
Republican or
party
Democrat,
isn't
right?
winning in that district.
So the primary really is the general election, is your point, Adam.
That's
and
right.
then because there's such low voter turnout, right? It really is, if it's a leans Republican or a Republican district, whoever wins the Republican party, Republican primary is going to win the general election, right? And your point is it's fostering more extreme candidates.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So a good example would be Rusty Bowers, who could have won a general but couldn't make it through the primary because he wasn't right-leaning enough for those who typically vote in those primaries or often have a grievance.
Well,
right? And the community was, the extreme community was upset with Rusty Bowers, so he didn't make it through the primary, even though he was clearly electable in a general.
And so grateful to former Speaker Bowers because, he wound up being the co-sponsor of Equality and Fairness for All Arizonans in 2022. And I think we feel that he received a great deal of backlash because he worked in a bipartisan way on a bill that would create LGBTQ inclusion while preserving religious liberty. It's a very fair and balanced bill. But we've always felt that one of the reasons he had the very right of him primary challenger was because of his support of equality and fairness.
I think there's no doubt.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And that's exactly why we're advocating for open primaries.
There are a long list of candidates just like Rusty,
Right.
who would be fantastic public officials, but they can't make.
But
it
they
through a
can't get
primary.
out of a primary.
Yeah.
Right. So younger voters overwhelmingly are registered as independents. We have this two-party system, which I think you're saying is broken, right? And really moves people to more extreme positions, does not encourage folks on either side of the aisle to work across the aisle. If anything, probably penalizes them. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it is the great state of Arizona and our great citizens that are the losers in this closed primary, right? That we currently have. So what's interesting to me is both Republicans and Democrats tend to be against the open primary, right? Against Prop 140. Talk about that. Is it for all the reasons that we've just talked about, or what are the reasons?
Yeah, it certainly would appear that they want to retain control. So what we have is so much politicking happening that your Democrats are actually rooting. This goes both ways,
Yeah.
but just as an example, they're rooting for the more extreme Republican candidate because they won't make it through a general.
Because they
It
think
increases their odds.
they're more
in the
beatable
general.
in a general.
Correct. And
Okay.
the same thing happens. The Republicans want the most extreme left-leaning Democrat because they think it'll give them the edge in the general. So they're actually pushing each other to the extremes because they each think they're going to do better in the general. And so our candidates just get more and more extreme.
Okay. So
It's working pretty well for the Democratic Party in Arizona. They've been winning a lot of statewide offices because of the extreme candidates that are coming from the Republicans. So in the short term, if I'm the Democratic Party, I understand why you don't want this to pass. This is working out pretty well. It's a long-term thing here.
Sure.
We need two functioning parties competing for ideas in the public marketplace of ideas, and then collaborating to solve problems like water, like a long list of issues that
like
just
LGBTQ inclusion, yeah,
To
like
take an
water.
example.
Immigration,
Yeah.
climate,
Yeah,
there's so
immigration, all
many
of these
issues.
things.
But Adam's point is a good one. As long as they keep running MAGA candidates, Arizona again and again and again is saying that's too extreme.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sorry. One interesting point is, this is not to create moderate candidates necessarily. It's just to create less extreme. So someone like Rusty Bowers, I would not consider a moderate by any stretch.
He's a conservative.
He's definitely conservative, and he would be able to survive for something like this. That district that he's in is still going to put a conservative candidate up.
Right.
It's just not going to be extreme. It's a less extreme candidate.
Yeah, we're not advocating for milquetoast candidates. Not at all.
But you're saying
But
if
we
the
want a
extremes are
robust
over
debate.
here, it's
Right.
the 10% on both sides.
That's right.
We want to get into this movable middle, right? And this is where bridge building happens,
That's
right?
it.
I mean, that's what we believe at One Community is. It's about to having conversations with the folks that are really movable. There are folks on both sides that are extreme that are not going to move, regardless of how thoughtful the argument is or how much you educate folks. They just are going to be where they're going to be. This is about, I think, it sounds like serving more Arizonans with saner policy is what I'm hearing.
100%. And then also just to point out the complexity of the issues we're facing, immigration, climate, inclusivity. We need people who are willing to work across the aisle to come up with really great solutions to the biggest challenges of our time, not people who are refusing to even call one another.
Well, I mean, it's such a fantastic point. And we talk about this all the time. If this is about ideological purity, you're only going to be talking to a third of the people in the state, wherever you're at on this issue. Right. And we need the majority of people engaged, right? Mm-hmm. And from a one community standpoint, that's our LGBTQ plus inclusive community. It's our bipartisan business community and the faith community, right? We think we need to be engaging. This is the trifecta so that we can move sound policy forward. And if you look at our track record in center-right leaning municipalities like Mesa, like Glendale, like Chandler, we've been successful and we've been able to bring, municipal ordinances that are inclusive of everyone to over 3.2 million folks in the last decade, right?
And what's the difference between a municipal election and a statewide election?
They're nonpartisan.
Boom.
Okay.
Bingo.
So let's talk about if you're an independent candidate or a party non-declared candidate, right? What happens if Prop 140, where are we at now if you're running, right? It's an uphill battle?
It's a big uphill battle. The requirements, your signature requirements are so excessive and so much further beyond what the party candidates have to do that it's virtually impossible.
Yeah, I believe it was 7,000 if you're a Democrat or Republican,
signatures.
60,000 signatures if you're running as an independent.
So 8 times more
versus 60,000.
Yeah.
So we're penalizing people for not being binary in the choices that they make as far as who's going to, not being one issue voters.
Right.
We're penalizing folks. What happens, Prop 140 passes, and I'm a party non-declared or an independent voter? Is it the 7,000? Am I in line with a Republican or Democrat if I'm running for office?
I don't know what the number of signatures will be, what the final number will be, but it will be equal no matter whether you're registered as a Democrat, Republican, or independent. It will be equal. But then in addition, the legislature will choose the number of candidates that will advance to the general election. And they can change it, but it is recommended, was it 3 to 5?
3 to 5.
Somewhere in the 3 to 5 range.
So I've been really doing my research on this because I am an overachieving independent voter.
And when you say research, to be clear, you mean Dr. Google.
Dr. Google? No, I've listened to some podcasts and some experts talking on this issue recently as well. But I do like Dr. Google a lot.
Should have invited Dr. Google to join us.
Dr. Google
today.
is nonpartisan. Dr. Google will give you information on anything you ask about.
Says you.
It says me. Very fair, Dr. Google is. Now I've totally forgot what I was going to say. But I'm plugged in and I try really hard to make sure that I'm showing up and I'm voting. Like I think that this is my civic duty, right? And will this make it? So if Prop 140 passes, this is really so much about the primary though. So Kimber and Adam, you're saying 3 to 5. That's about the general election, right? If I'm understanding this correctly, this is really about leveling the playing field for primary so that everyone, regardless of party or independent status, has the equal opportunity to participate.
Inclusion. You might say.
That's all about inclusion and fairness.
But that 3 to 5 is the question is how many advance to the general election. And it's an arbitrary number. The legislature is going to argue about whether it should be 3 or 5. I can't see that there's any particular advantage between 3, 4, or 5, but maybe someone will figure out how to game the system for one of those.
I mean, you can have really crowded primaries now even, right? So you could have a crowded general election, I guess.
That's right.
And what I'm hearing you say, Adam, is the legislature will decide this. And am I correct that the legislature already decides these rules? Because I know that's a myth that seems to need some busting or some...
Legislature decides these rules for municipal elections.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They do right now. It's just we don't hear about it all that often. And it's not something they would probably try to go back and change on an annual basis. They're going to set it and let it run.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm sorry, Angela,
Nope.
one more. If for some reason the legislature can't come to an agreement on the number between 3 and 5, then it kicks to the Secretary of State. The people who wrote the proposition were concerned that the legislature just might game this whole thing and say, you know what, we're not going to have a number, so that way you can't do an open primary. But the authors of the initiative anticipated that, and they say, no, if you didn't make a decision by this date, it goes to the Secretary of State to pick a number.
so somebody's going to decide how many candidates make it to the general election, but this is really about readjusting the primary, and that's why it's all about
Yes.
the open primary. That's the kind of the campaign and education around it. So am I correct that Prop 140 passes, it's an open primary, that means every voter gets the same ballot, and every voter sees all the candidates, regardless if they're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, a Libertarian, Green
In your
Party.
jurisdiction.
In your jurisdiction.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we start from a level playing field, and then whoever gets the most votes, and again, from a general election standpoint, it could be the top 2, it could be the top 4, top 3 or 5. The folks that are going to decide this initially are the folks at the legislature. If for whatever reason they can't agree, then this goes to the Secretary of State to decide how many people make it through the general election.
That little detail is about the strongest argument people have against this whole thing.
So why is that an argument against it?
We can't trust the legislature to do anything. How can we trust them with the number of people? Oh, the Secretary of State, what if it's a crazy person? They're going to pick a crazy number.
But going back to the fact that this is going to be less extreme candidates is the goal of all of this. Wouldn't we hope that we could trust the legislature more if this passes?
Well, there's certainly you got to cycle through the incumbents that are there that have gotten there from traditional ways. They're still going to have the incumbency advantage even in the open primary system. And it'll take a cycle or two to be able to feel the effects on policy.
But we do know right now they are not going to want to leave it to the Secretary of State. So they will be motivated to come up with a plan.
Right. So, but Adam, back to what you just said for just a second. You're saying that folks that are representing a party, Republican or Democrat, are still going to have they won't really have an advantage necessarily.
Incumbents, if you're an incumbent, you're
Yeah.
a sitting state senator. You've got name recognition. You've got all the perks of the office.
Right,
whatever.
and so you're saying it'll be 2 or 3 cycles should this take effect, right?
Yes.
Before we actually start seeing the positive impacts of this.
That's what they've seen in other states that have gone through this. That
Yeah.
it's when you want to, it's going to take that long. You might start seeing some less extreme candidates come up in the first cycle, of course, but when you wait you're not going to see the legislature working together because there's a majority of less extreme people for 2 or 3 cycles.
Okay. So this is already taken effect in other states, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the shining stars at this time are Nebraska and Louisiana. And I mean, again, this will not impact our federal delegation. We're not trying to change that process right now. We're focused on the state process,
Okay.
right? Our state legislators. But in Nebraska, you can just stack up on big issues, climate, immigration, reforms of any kind. The state legislature, elected through open primaries, were out there doing the work. They created a 67-page document on how they were going to invest their IRA dollars, what they were going to do about the climate, how they felt about immigration. And their federal delegation, again, very extreme, using the old method, and they just shot everything down. We don't want IRA dollars. We're shooting down anything related to immigration reform, a non-starter. And that's where the business community gets really worked up. We have to be able to discuss the issues. So if your response is literally, I'm plugging my ears and you are dead to me, I'm not even talking about this, then how are we going to see a path to the future? We need people who are willing to say, okay, we don't agree. Let me hear you. Let me listen to what your points are. Let me share my points, and let's see if we can forge a path forward that we can both live with.
Yeah, I mean that's policy, right?
It's
And
policy.
We always say policy is not
Right.
supposed to be about perfection, right? It really is about incremental change, and we believe it's about bridge building. So what I hear both of you saying is this creates the opportunity for folks to work across the aisle and actually be more solutions oriented, as opposed to the wildly dysfunctional
Sure.
things going on right
You
now.
know, for people who are fiscally conscious, I mean, you know that Arizona has struggled to get a balanced budget done in this environment. Louisiana, balanced budget on time, every time for years since they've implemented open primaries. So, you know, those two states are ahead of us, and we can look to what they're doing, and it's remarkable. And the contrast is remarkable as well. You can see clearly the difference.
We've got these games. We don't have serious politicians at the legislature. And the fact that the governor has agency directors that she wants to appoint, her team that she wants to bring in, which in Nebraska and Louisiana, I'm sure in most places, that's a pretty routine confirmation process. Some challenging questions asked. You make sure they're not bad people. But we're playing games here in Arizona. We've got extremists. Oh, I'm just going to name check him. Senator Jake Hoffman. Stopping the confirmation process so the governor can't have her team, can't move forward. He's rewarded by the extremes in his party, who are the only ones turning out to vote. He's got to go.
And the only way he's going to go is, you believe, or folks that are more extreme like him, are if we have open primaries so that...
He would be forced to talk to those people in his district.
That was going to be my question, right?
Yeah.
So you have open primaries, so that means someone like Jake Hoffman has to talk to more than just his base, right?
Absolutely.
In order to garner enough support to make it to the general election. And so this is where you see, again, not moderation, but less extreme. Is
Politicians are a product of the people they talk to.
Yep.
Yeah. Right now, he is only speaking to his base, and he's being rewarded for being more extreme because they're just encouraging him in that direction.
Right.
If he knew that he was going to have to face an open primary, you bet he'd have to talk to independents. He'd have to talk to Democrats.
Got it. So my next question was going to be, how do you think this is going to change the way candidates campaign? But I think you've really just spoken to that, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to talk to folks that you may not be ideologically aligned with, right? Because whatever district you're in, you're actually supposed to be representing everyone in the district, not just the folks that voted.
Really?
It's who knew?
That came from Dr. Google too.
Dr. Google told me that.
Civics class in
I'm
fifth grade.
representative for everyone in that district, not just the slim minority of folks who maybe
Who
more
think like
extreme,
me.
who think like me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of where you're at.
And to call back the earlier point, he'll have a tremendous advantage in his election, even in an open primary system, because he's very well known in the district. He's been an incumbent for a long time. I think he's generally popular in the district, so he might just win again.
So Adam, but that's your point. If this is going to take a couple of cycles, should this take effect, right, and it pass, it likely takes a couple of cycles before it really, really takes hold, and you start to see kind of what you're seeing in Louisiana and Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all about Arizona's future. I mean, so Arizona's future is on the ballot right now, right, in November.
Yes, it is.
From a CEO business perspective, the job of CEO requires you not to think in short-term increments, months and quarters and years, but really years and decades. And that's the way we're looking at this. This is about decades of Arizona's future. And if we keep this same system that's broken, that maybe in the short term is working for Democrats, but we don't have a competing marketplace of ideas that's moving policy forward, that's not good for Arizona's long term.
Well, Arizona's going to be left behind, right? So I get it. So we know how this is going to hopefully encourage candidates to talk with folks that maybe have different thoughts and ideas than maybe their base does, right? How do you think this is going to improve voter participation in the state of Arizona? Do you think if it's an open primary that more people actually vote in the primary? Because just historically, we just have a really low voter turnout in primaries, right?
Yeah.
So this maybe is part of the fix, but it seems like maybe more needs to be done to encourage voters to participate in the primary.
For sure.
Yeah, even if I look at my own, I vote all the time, but I bet half of the last times that I vote, I was voting against someone, right? It was sort of, trying to do my best to
vote versus an offensive
navigate. Wow. And so, I think people would be encouraged if they had an opportunity to vote for someone that was sane, rational, solutions-minded, not trying to deny climate change. You know what I mean? I think that particularly young people will be like, okay, I can live with that. And they're not showing up right now because they can't live with what they're hearing.
So
I don't have a whole lot of hope that the primary is going to get real high participation. I mean, I don't. But the general always does. And the general is going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 candidates on there. That's a nice variety to choose from. And the voters are going to have to do their homework and do their due diligence and figure out which of those. And they will turn out for the general. And there will be good options in the general.
okay. And it sounds like, to your point, someone who maybe is more extreme may still make it through to the general, but along with candidates that are less extreme as well,
almost
right?
certainly will make it through.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Got it. And then we just got to encourage people to vote, right?
Yes.
I mean, no big deal.
Well, I think we need to continue to help people understand how policy impacts their lives directly. It feels to me like there are a lot of people out there who think that's a bunch of, it's nonsense. I don't want to participate in that. I'm going to put my head down and work.
Yeah.
And they don't understand how these policies are impacting their everyday lives. And I think that's one of the things that I try to do is take complex issues and put the individual in that. When you've cut your teeth on trying to explain a local economy, you have to come up with ways to help people envision themselves in that process to help get them motivated and participating in the systems here in Arizona.
I totally agree with you. We have our Your Vote is Your Voice nonpartisan educational campaign. We're so happy that Local First is a great partner on it. But for us, the question I always ask folks is, what are you passionate about? Because whatever it is you're passionate about, whatever matters to you, is either directly or indirectly on this ballot. I guarantee it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with what really matters to you, and then we can start educating you about how these issues are connected, right? And how the not voting is going to impact your future. And we really are all in this together, right? And I think we want an Arizona that, I like to say celebrates, protects, and respects us all.
I have one other thing I wanted to bring up in support of Prop 140. This year, our ballot is longer than it has ever been. So we've gotten into this pattern here in Arizona. The legislature passes something extreme, which is right-leaning. The governor vetoes it, left-leaning. And then they refer it back to the voters. That's a huge expense, time, and then it's a deterrent for voting.
Yeah.
How many propositions are on the?
12 or 13.
Yeah,
I think it's gonna be like a 3 or 4 page ballot.
It's
right?
longer
it's
than
long.
it has ever been in our history, and it's just exhausting. And a lot of voters will be dissuaded from showing up because they don't know all of the answers and don't want to just contribute. Here's a few boxes of what I know, and I'll turn in the rest blank. It's a lot of work, and it's not a way to govern. It's not a way to govern.
There's another element to it as well, which is when you have a legislature that's out of touch with the voters, then the voters take things in their own hands and they put their own initiatives on the ballot.
Right.
And that's the other thing that's going on. So there's the referendums coming and the initiatives, and if there was a responsive legislature that was in touch, we wouldn't need all these.
And if there's something wrong, right? Not necessarily with Prop 140, but with anything that gets passed, right? You have to wait till you have another voting cycle to fix whatever.
And by the way, then it's voter protected. It's almost impossible to change, which is just a terrible way to make policy. Mm-hmm. There are going to be things that are on this ballot that aren't perfect, that something's wrong, and we can't tweak them because it's voter protected. Okay. That's a failure of the legislature. Now, the legislature is trying to stop the ability of residents, voters, to put initiatives on the ballot. They don't like this idea. They want to keep that power for themselves. The way they say it is they don't want out-of-state influences coming in and Californiaing our Arizona, which there is an element of that for sure. But it really has to do with an out-of-state legislature.
Yeah, in part, it's because they're not doing their job.
So, any final thoughts?
Yeah, final thought on this participation idea. There's some research that says 69% of people trust their CEO and expect them to tackle societal issues. And that's really influenced me quite a bit. And I've got an audience of 200 employees who are confused about the whole thing as well. And so I'm taking it upon myself to educate them about how to vote and where to vote and when to vote and all those kinds of, the nuts and bolts of voting. Did I say how to vote? That feels like it's a little condescending. And if they're interested, I'm giving them pros and cons on key initiatives that are important to me. And if they want to click one more link, I'll tell them which way I'm leaning and which ones I'm supporting. But like, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do in a business organization, which formerly was taboo, but we got to reach people some way.
And we need to meet them where they're at, right? And so it is an overwhelming ballot. It's the longest ballot, if not in Arizona's history, then most likely close to it, right? We're having a whole conversation about ballots up, right? That you start at the bottom. Bottoms up is, I'm like, I think we need beer for the ballot. You have an idea with bottoms up and starting at the bottom of the ballot and working your way up and taking your time and, and having these discussions. One of the reasons that we're talking about this on Better Together Arizona. I know you both are have to go. The website is Make Elections Fair AZ. I welcome you back if you want to continue this conversation at any time. And thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Angela.